A vision to remake Britain, and a renewed commitment to a defining creed of modern conservatism, devoting a sizable chunk of our national income to overseas aid.
Here is the route map to take us forward.
An overall package which helped Boris Johnson to an emphatic victory in the 2019 general election. But with the nation's finances buffeted by the worst economic downturn in centuries, a breach now of that core manifesto pledge to meet the UN target of spending 0.7% of gross national income on aid.
But everyone will accept that when you're suddenly compelled to spend £407 billion on sheltering our people from an economic hurricane never experienced in living memory, there must inevitably be consequences for other areas of public spending.
And the Prime Minister diffused a backbench Conservative rebellion by putting two manifesto pledges side by side. Yes, said the Prime Minister, to returning to the 0.7% aid target at the right time. But that time won't be right, he cautioned, until another manifesto pledge is met. No borrowing to fund day-to-day government spending, and debt levels must be falling.
It seems that £4 billion is really...
Two new fiscal tests which did little to impress one unlikely rebel.
We made a promise to the poorest people in the world. The government has broken that promise. This motion means that promise may be broken for years to come. With deep regret, I will vote against the motion today.
Yeah. The ayes to the right, 333. The noes to the left, 298. The ayes have it, a lock.
A win for the government. A happy Chancellor who just saved £4 billion and who also effectively secured Parliament's agreement that any spending beyond his plans would mean tax rises or cuts elsewhere. Relief and smiles in government after ministers saw off a potentially dangerous rebellion. It's not every day that a former Prime Minister risks the naughty step. The rebels said they had 60. Where were they all? One cabinet minister gloated to me. But there is one underlying story here. After a year of writing cheques, this most canny of chancellors has tightened the fiscal rules with implications for his party and for his next-door neighbour, who does rather like to spend.
The Chancellor has, I think you could say, confronted his colleagues with the consequences of spending public money, reminded them that there are lots of other areas where they might want to be spending public money, and you could regard it almost as an opening salvo in the upcoming spending review. With the Chancellor, I think, shooting across not just the bows of Tory backbenchers, but also possibly across the bows of the Prime Minister.
Defeat for the rebels, but the fight continues for their vision of global Britain.
Well, it shows it's alive and well within the Conservative Party as much as it is within the opposition parties, because people do believe in the impact of foreign aid spend, but clearly not enough of us. We do have to accept that the circumstances are different from when we won the election in 2019. I think everyone recognises that. But there are still a great many people on the benches who may not have voted with me tonight, but voted with the government and who also recognise the need of 0.7% in the future. And we'll keep that torch alive.
A country still proud of its global reach, but time now to put our own house in order before earlier ambitions can be fulfilled.
Well, joining me now are Sarah Champion, Labour MP for Rotherham and Chair of the International Development Select Committee, and George Freeman, Conservative MP for Mid-Norfolk and former Transport Minister. And George Freeman, let's start with you. Sir John Major said today the government's broken its word and should be ashamed, and that it's the stamp of Little England, not Great Britain. He's right, isn't he?
No, I disagree. I mean, he's made clear his opposition to the Prime Minister on all grounds, really. And for me, look, I take aid really seriously. I take our aid commitment seriously. 2 years ago, I was in Lebanon. I've hitchhiked through Africa. I've been to the Peshawar Valley and Kashmir. I really believe in our aid commitment. And if I felt that this was undermining our commitment to global Britain, I'd have voted against it. Let's be really clear. But I don't. And the reason is, firstly, this is completely unprecedented. I think the public know that COVID has hit our public finances. It's a crisis we've never seen before. We're back to levels of debts not seen since the war. Every pound we spend, we're borrowing. And I needed to hear the Chancellor today, as he did, say that this is temporary, and he and the Prime Minister have both said, both to me and in the House, we're going back to 0.7, and more than that, they've set a clear roadmap to how we do it, with the OBR holding our feet to the flames.
But how can it not undermine the commitment to global Britain? We've been hearing, the head of WaterAid talking about how it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of lives. To cut aid for life-saving water and sanitation in the middle of the worst pandemic for 100 years is unconscionable, he said. Mary Stopes said last week they've already closed down their team in Nigeria that's reaching the most marginalised communities. Christian Aid in South Sudan said they said their funding's gone.
Here's how. There are three reasons. I mean, there is a big aid industry, and they will be suffering tonight, and I understand their complaints. But here's why it needn't. Firstly, we spend 10 billion a year on aid. That's after the 0.2% reduction. And that goes on humanitarian aid at the top of the pyramid, very important humanitarian relief and stabilisation, as I saw in the Bekaa Valley in Syria, and then what's called the longer-term sustainable resilience programmes, where people have seen us contributing to the Indian space programme and other projects. It'll be down in those things that we cut. We're not going to cut the humanitarian aid, the really important stabilisation work, but also something else. The UK already commits way more on top of our ODA commitment. So on peacekeeping, 400 million a year, not included in the ODA budget. On diplomacy, we're the third biggest network in the world. On tariffs, by reducing the European Union's 40% tariffs on food from Africa, that's £1 billion a year commitment to trade for the poorest nations. On WHO, we're increasing our spend by 30%. On Gavi, we've funded over 1.3 billion vaccines exporting internationally. On COVAX, £500 million, we're the biggest donor. This is all outside ODA. Honestly, if I felt we were becoming a Little England party of retreat from global challenges, I wouldn't be voting for this. That's not what we're doing.
Let's bring in Sarah Champion. I saw you shaking your head at that point where George Freeman was saying, it's not going to hit humanitarian aid. What's your reaction to that and to what's happening?
Well, it is. At the moment, my committee, the International Development Select Committee, is doing an inquiry looking specifically at the future of UK aid. And we've had 93 organisations who have come to us who have already faced these cuts. What we're seeing, though, with the vote today is two things. One, it was an absolute slapdown for the Conservatives who were trying to honour their manifesto commitment, which this government seems to have thrown on a pyre. But also what we're seeing is just the start, I believe, of the unpicking of the aid programme that we should be incredibly proud of in this country. A, because it's the right thing to do, but B, because it gets us a seat at every global table. And it gives us such incredible international standing. We're seen as a country that does the right thing, that stands by the world, come thick or thin. And we're just literally giving that away. And the thing that concerns me most is, as we're giving away our soft power, other nations, and I'm thinking specifically of Russia and China, they're stepping right in there. And that should be something that concerns all of us.
And what about this point? A fairly important point that we need to balance the books. We've spent £407 billion on the pandemic so far, and something has to give, and this is the first thing that does.
Absolutely understand that, and built in the legislation around aid is, as our economy drops, so does our proportion of contribution. So that was there already. But it's also about making choices, and we need to be very clear this was a political choice. So basically almost exactly the same amount of money that's been cut out of the aid budget has been put into the defence budget. So they are prioritising children's health over choosing to buy nuclear weapons. It's as blunt as that. But also, I know that George has been to Lebanon and has written about it. We're choosing to pay for 200 million for a royal yacht that we don't need or, have any particular desire for. And that's the exact amount of money that this financial year is being cut out of the aid to Lebanon, a country where 80% of families can't afford food. Also a key strategic country in the Middle East. So we are making choices. This isn't about saving money. This is about some bizarre political posturing. And I don't know what the strategy is behind all of this. If I did, maybe I'd be more sympathetic.
Well, George Freeman says he'll tell you. I'd like you to also answer the question, perhaps that ties in with that, which is, it's political. How does it play out on the doorstep? Is this popular on the doorsteps? Is that what you find?
I have no idea, but this is not a political decision, it's an economic decision taken by the Chancellor. Let me just deal with the points that Sarah made, and I hugely respect her work, but I noticed she didn't come back on the list of things, very specific, very substantial things we're doing outside of ODA. It's not a retreat, Sarah. You just can't make an argument that we're retreating, because we're leading in commitments on top of our aid budget. But here's the strategy. If we're investing in levelling up and skills, COVID has been an economic catastrophe in the UK. As we end the furloughing, and we've stepped in and provided the most extraordinary support to Sarah's constituents as well as mine, and I would argue the public wanted that. The most important thing is we minimise economic scarring. And through the levelling up programme and the skills programme, we're going to see a transition from old jobs to new. The quicker we can do that, the quicker we grow our economy, and the quicker we get back to 0.5% of a bigger economy, and then quicker we get back to 0.7% of a bigger economy. It's firstly about the slice of the cake. So this is a strategy about getting back quickly to growth. And secondly, it's about making sure that every pound we spend goes to the most important frontline humanitarian and stabilisation efforts.
Sarah Champion, this is temporary. This is what they're saying. When, do you believe that?
No, I don't believe that, because the double lock that they've put on makes it so incredibly difficult to ever meet the criteria to enable us to go back to 0.7, that for me, I cannot see this as a temporary measure. What I actually think is going on is more, and one of your speakers spoke about it earlier, it's more, I think there could be a political play going on here between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Because what I was seeing and what I was hearing was the Prime Minister actually saying, you know, we are going to be going back to 0.7. We're going to be doing that in the short term. It was a clear priority for him. And also his real desire around things like girls' education, for example, all of that is being swept away, and he's being made to look like a hypocrite. The only person that's benefiting from this is Mr. Sunak. And I think he has some warped idea about what does play, particularly on the northern doorstep. And he's wrong about that. And I just can't bear the fact that we're seeing some of the poorest people in the world being played off against some of the poorest people in this country because of this power grab that appears to be going on.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. You were about to speak, but I'm afraid...
we are the biggest donor to the World Bank and to the African Development Bank.
We're going to have to wrap it up. Sarah Champion, George Freeman, thank you so much for coming in.